Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise, take those complex stacks of source material, and turn them into something you can really grasp. And today, we're tackling something truly substantial and sensitive. We're diving deep into a large body of international legal reports, findings, all focused on the conduct of Israeli authorities.
Yeah, it's a huge scope. We're talking decades of policy, right up to the very recent conflicts.
Exactly. The sources our listener sent over, they're immense.
They really are. Reports from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, you've got detailed findings from UN bodies, analyses of what's happening right now at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ.
Even an International Criminal Court, the ICC.
Right. Lot to cover.
So our mission today is clear, but it's demanding. We need to unpack the core legal allegations found in these documents and do it impartially.
That's key.
Impartially.
We're talking about the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution, alleged war crimes, and, the most recent and perhaps heaviest allegation, genocide. And we need to be super clear. Our focus is strictly on what these documents say. The findings they report, the evidence they cite, the legal analysis they offer.
The goal is to give you, the listener, a rigorous understanding of what these international bodies and NGOs are actually alleging based on their work.
Yeah, and we've structured this to make sense. We'll start with the foundations, the long-term stuff. Policies on land, residency, civil rights. The things that the reports say establish this context of systematic oppression.
Okay, and then?
Then we'll move into the specific allegations around military conduct, excessive force, and finally wrap up with those highest legal thresholds being debated right now in the international courts.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Let's dive in. Section 1, defining the legal frameworks, apartheid and persecution. These words get thrown around a lot.
Often quite loosely.
Right, but in international law, they have very specific, very high bars for proof. So what are the precise legal definitions we need to work with here?
Okay, let's start with persecution. Under customary international law, it's really about two things happening together. First, you need severe abuses of fundamental rights. And these abuses have to be widespread or systematic.
Widespread or systematic, okay.
Yeah. But that's not enough. The second crucial part is discriminatory intent. Those abuses have to be committed specifically because of the victim's group identity, racial, national, or ethnic grounds.
So the intent behind the abuse is critical.
Absolutely. The Rome Statute, which governs the ICC, confirms this. It's about the intentional and severe deprivation of rights targeting a specific group. It's a high bar.
Got it. And then there's apartheid. That term carries such specific historical weight from South Africa. How does international law define it as a crime against humanity today? What's the threshold?
It's very specifically defined in Article 7 of the Rome Statute. It involves inhumane acts, things like murder, torture, forcible transfer, persecution itself, acts that are often crimes on their own. But for apartheid, these acts must happen within a specific context, an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another racial group.
An institutionalized regime. Systematic oppression and domination.
Yes. But here's the absolute critical element, the thing that elevates it to apartheid. These inhumane acts must be committed with the intention of maintaining that regime.
Okay, so it's not just about having separate or discriminatory systems. You have to prove the intent is specifically to keep that system of domination going.
Precisely. That specific intent, maintaining the regime, is the distinguishing feature of apartheid as a crime against humanity.
And we should probably clarify this term racial group. The reports aren't talking about biological race in the way people might commonly think, are they?
No, absolutely not. That's a really important point. International law, especially looking at things like the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, uses race very broadly.
Yeah.
It includes descent, national origin, or ethnic origin. So, the reports argue that this framework applies because, in the specific context they're analyzing, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are treated legally, socially, politically as distinct identity groups. That fits within this broader legal understanding of racial group for the purpose of analyzing institutional discrimination.
Got it. So if intent is such a high bar, especially for apartheid, the intent to maintain the regime, the reports must really focus on establishing that long-standing governmental intention, right? What evidence do they bring forward to say the goal is domination, not something else like security or managing resources?
They dedicate a huge amount of analysis to this. The core argument across these reports is that when you look at policies over decades, you see an underlying intention, an intention focused on maintaining Jewish-Israeli control and achieving very specific demographic outcomes across the whole territory, Israel proper, East Jerusalem, the West Bank.
And they point to specific documents.
Yes, explicit guiding documents. A really powerful example cited frequently is the 1980 Drawbles Plan.
Okay, the Drawbles Plan. Tell us about that. Why is it considered such key evidence for long-term intent?
Well, Matityahu Drawbles was head of the World Zionist Organization's settlement division. This plan heavily shaped West Bank settlement policy. And it wasn't subtle at all. It explicitly called for Israeli authorities to establish settlements between existing Palestinian population centers.
Between them. Geographically strategic, then.
Hugely strategic. The stated goal was literally to make it hard for Palestinians to create territorial contiguity and political unity. Think about that, preventing the physical connection of Palestinian towns and villages.
That sounds incredibly deliberate, politically and geographically engineered.
It is, and the plan goes further. It states the aim is to, and this is a direct quote the reports highlight, remove any trace of doubt about our intention to control Judea and Samaria forever.
Wow. Control forever.
Exactly. When you have a government-linked plan explicitly stating the intention is permanent control and deliberately preventing the political unity of the people under occupation, international legal analysts see that as powerful evidence of the mens rea, the mental element, required for crimes like apartheid.
And this wasn't just about the West Bank, right? The sources mention similar explicit goals for Jerusalem's demographics.
That's right. The reports point to formal planning documents for the Jerusalem municipality. These documents state a clear governmental goal of maintaining a solid Jewish majority in the city.
A solid Jewish majority. Did they have actual numbers?
They did. Initially, the target ratio was 70% Jewish to 30% Arab. Later, it was adjusted, but still explicit, aiming for 60.40. These aren't accidental outcomes. They were stated governmental objectives based entirely on group identity, designed to manage the demographic makeup of a specific contested city.
The reports also pull out some very candid quotes from high-ranking officials, quotes that seem to cut through the usual security justifications for certain laws. How are those used?
They're used to argue that security justifications are often, let's say, a convenient narrative, but not the ultimate driver for some key policies. Take Ariel Sharon's comments back in 2005. He was talking about renewing the citizenship and entry into Israel law.
That's the law restricting family reunification for Palestinians?
Exactly, a law with huge impacts on families. And Sharon said, according to the reports, quite bluntly, there's no need to hide behind security arguments. There's a need for the existence of a Jewish state.
He just said it outright.
He did. And he added that this law, restricting family reunification, was the way to overcome the demographic demon. That kind of language linking a discriminatory law directly to a demographic goal, calling demographics a demon, is presented as very strong evidence of intent.
Extremely strong. It bypasses the security rationale entirely.
And it wasn't just Sharon. Then Finance Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly argued around the same time that they needed to make the citizenship process harder, specifically, quote, to guarantee Israel's security and a Jewish majority in Israel. The reports collect these statements as direct evidence that core discriminatory policies are intentionally deployed to maintain group-based domination, which aligns with the legal definition of apartheid.
Okay, so we've established the focus on intent. Now let's look at how this translates into actual institutional discrimination, the mechanics of it, especially land and residency.
Right, the physical mechanisms of control. Land is absolutely central to the analysis of apartheid. Inside Israel, within the Green Line, the reports state that authorities seized somewhere between 65% and 75% of all land owned by Palestinians before 1948.
65 to 75%. How?
Through various laws and mechanisms, a major one being the absentee property law. But crucially, what the reports emphasize is the current situation. Today, state lands make up about 93% of Israel's total land area. That's enormous.
93%.
And according to a 2003 government-commissioned report cited in these sources, state land policy effectively serves the explicit objective of Jewish settlement.
So almost all public land is institutionally geared towards benefiting one group over another, even affecting Palestinian citizens of Israel.
That's a key point. The Negev region is the prime case study for this within Israel proper.
Right, the Bedouin communities, what's happening there?
It's critical because it directly involves Israeli citizens. The state refuses to legally recognize 35 Palestinian Bedouin communities. These aren't new arrivals. These are communities with generations of history on that land, maybe 90,000 people affected.
And because they're unrecognized.
Because they're unrecognized, all their homes, schools, everything they build is automatically deemed illegal by the state. And the consequences are just devastating and systematic.
It's not just a line on a map, it impacts basic survival. The reports call this denial of infrastructure an inhumane act, contributing to apartheid, right?
Right. Exactly. People in these villages are cut off. No connection to the national electricity grid, no running water from the state company, no paved roads, no sewage systems. They live under constant threat of demolition.
Do we know how many demolitions?
The reports cite official government data. Between 2013 and 2019 alone, Israeli authorities demolished over 10,000 Bedouin homes and structures in the Negev.
10,000 in just 6 years. That's an incredible number.
It's staggering, and it points to a strategy. One village, Al-Arakib, has been fighting expropriation in court for years. Reports say it's been demolished, bulldozed, and rebuilt by residents well over 180 times.
Over 180 times.
And official government plans for developing the Negev explicitly state the goal is to concentrate the Bedouin population into a few recognized townships. Why? To, quote, maximize the land available for Jewish communities.
So the reports argue this isn't random enforcement. It's a coordinated policy aimed at controlling land along ethnic lines. Moving from land within Israel to residency status, particularly in East Jerusalem, this is another area highlighted as involving inhumane acts linked to persecution. How do residency restrictions work there?
Okay, so when Israel occupied and later annexed East Jerusalem in 1967, it didn't grant citizenship to the Palestinian residents. Instead, they were given permanent resident status.
Which sounds stable, but isn't quite citizenship.
It's fundamentally different because, unlike citizenship, permanent residency can be revoked by the Interior Ministry. And it has been. The reports state that since 1967, at least 14,701 Palestinians from East Jerusalem have had their residency revoked.
14,000 people losing their right to live in their city. On what grounds?
The main tool is the Center of Life requirement.
The Center of Life test. What does that involve? And why is it discriminatory, according to the reports?
Palestinians have to constantly prove that their primary connection, their home, their work, their family ties, remains exclusively within the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, as defined by Israel. If they study abroad for too long, work outside the city, or even if a spouse lives just across the municipal line in the West Bank, they risk losing their residency.
And Jewish Israelis living there don't face this?
No. Jewish Israeli citizens, including settlers living in East Jerusalem, do not have to pass this test to maintain their right to live there. The reports argue this creates an inherently precarious status for Palestinians, designed to push them out and facilitate the demographic goals we talked about earlier.
The sources also point to the freeze on family reunification since 2000, another tool for demographic management.
A very effective one, according to the analysis. This freeze, implemented initially during the Second Intifada and largely maintained since, prevents Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza from gaining legal status in Israel or East Jerusalem, even if they marry an Israeli citizen or resident.
So it splits families based purely on origin.
Yes, and it directly limits the growth of the Palestinian population within Israel and East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Thousands of families are affected, unable to live together legally. The reports cite this systematic manipulation of legal status, based on group identity, as a core component of institutionalized oppression.
Okay, that takes us right into Section 2, how these systems of control play out specifically in the occupied Palestinian territories, the OPT, looking at restrictions on movement and how resources are divided up. If the goal is domination, then breaking up the Palestinian population seems like a key tactic.
Fragmentation is cited again and again as crucial. By controlling who can move where and who can live where, the reports argue that Israel systematically divides Palestinians, keeping Gaza separate from the West Bank, East Jerusalem separate from both, and all distinct from Palestinian citizens inside Israel.
And the effect of that fragmentation?
It makes it much harder to see the single, overarching system of control being applied by the same dominant group, Jewish Israelis, across all these areas. It helps obscure the systematic nature of the oppression, both to the outside world and perhaps even to Palestinians living under these different regimes.
How is this separation enforced, particularly between the West Bank and Gaza? They're supposed to be one territory, right?
Legally, yes, under international law and agreements. But since 2000, Israel has implemented what human rights groups call a one-way permit system. Movement between the two areas is extremely restricted. But when permits are granted, it's overwhelmingly for people moving to Gaza, not from it.
A one-way flow. What's the systemic goal or effect of that?
The reports argue it's a form of social engineering aimed at long-term demographic separation. An Israeli Army policy document from 2018, cited in the sources, explicitly mentioned reducing travel between the areas after Hamas came to power. But the effect is clear. West Bank residents can apply to permanently relocate to Gaza for certain humanitarian reasons, but Gaza residents, they can only get permits to move to the West Bank in the rarest cases.
So it encourages movement away from the West Bank, where settlements are expanding, and towards Gaza.
That's the analysis. It actively helps shift the Palestinian population balance and permanently severs social, economic, and family ties between the two parts of the OPT.
And then there's the general closure of Gaza itself, which has really intensified this isolation since 2007.
Yeah, the reports go into detail on the severity of the Gaza closure. After Hamas took control there, Israel declared Gaza hostile territory. They imposed a near-blanket ban on people leaving, not based on individual security risk, but as a general policy.
So who can get out?
Travel through the Erez crossing, the main pedestrian crossing, is basically restricted to what Israel deems exceptional humanitarian circumstances. Mostly critical medical patients needing treatment unavailable in Gaza, and maybe a very small number of others.
Do the reports give numbers to show how drastic that change was?
They do. It's stark. In September 2000, just before the second Intifada tightened restrictions, the average number of exits from Gaza per day was around 26,000.
26,000, okay.
Fast forward to the period 2015-2019, the daily average number of exits, just 373.
From 26,000 down to less than 400?
A tiny fraction. The consequence, the reports stress, is that an entire generation has grown up in Gaza under this closure, many never having left the Strip. It turns Gaza into this huge, isolated enclave where Israel still controls the borders, the airspace, the sea access, effectively controlling who and what goes in and out.
This control extends beyond people to vital resources, right? Making life itself difficult. Water in the West Bank is a major focus.
Yes. This is presented as a classic example within the apartheid analysis, discriminatory access to fundamental resources. The reports state clearly, Israeli authorities maintain primary control over virtually all water sources in the West Bank, especially the Jordan River and the Mountain Aquifer.
The Mountain Aquifer being the most important source there.
By far. And this control isn't new. It goes back to military orders issued right after the occupation began in 1967 and 1968. Those orders essentially gave the Israeli military full authority over all water-related matters and declared water resources state property.
Even though, physically, most of the aquifer's recharge area is under the West Bank itself.
That's the crucial point. About 80% of the rainfall that replenishes the mountain aquifer falls on the West Bank. Yet, the reports find that Israel extracts around 90% of the water that's withdrawn from it each year.
90%. So Palestinians are left with about 10% of the water from under their own land.
Essentially, yes. And this is reinforced because, for decades, Israeli authorities have systematically denied Palestinians permits to drill new wells, or even just to rehabilitate their existing older wells.
So they can't access more water themselves? They have to buy it?
Largely, yes. They become dependent on purchasing water, often at higher cost, from Israel's national water company, Mekarot. Water that, again, primarily originates beneath the West Bank. It's a structure of dependency and control.
What does this look like in terms of actual water consumption?
The disparities are stark. The World Bank found overall Israelis consume about 4 times more water per person than Palestinians in the West Bank. But when you look specifically at Israeli settlers living in the West Bank, the estimates cited suggest settlers use at least 4 times, possibly much more, water per capita than their Palestinian neighbors in the very same territory.
4 times more living side by side.
The reports argue this isn't just random inequality. It's the result of a deliberate system of resource allocation that privileges the dominant group, the settlers, over the occupied population.
And the state actively prevents Palestinians from trying to improve their own situation. You mentioned demolitions earlier.
Yes, beyond just denying permits for new wells, there's active destruction. Between 2009 and 2019 alone, the reports document Israeli authorities demolishing or seizing 547 water and sanitation structures built by Palestinians.
What kind of structures?
Cisterns for collecting rainwater, water pipes, small reservoirs. Often these were built with funding from international humanitarian organizations to try and alleviate the shortages. But if they lack an Israeli permits, which are notoriously difficult for Palestinians to obtain in Area C of the West Bank, they get destroyed. This directly worsens the living conditions.
This level of neglect and discrimination has serious consequences for health and the environment. The reports use the aerial settlement cluster in the nearby Palestinian town of Selfit as a case study.
Yeah, the Ariel Sulfate case is highlighted because it connects institutional policy, or lack thereof, directly to severe physical harm, which is one of the specific inhumane acts listed under the apartheid definition. The reports detail how, for years, raw sewage and untreated industrial chemical waste from large settlements like Ariel just flowed downhill into Palestinian villages and agricultural land below.
And this wasn't just an occasional leak. Ariel's wastewater plant was known to be malfunctioning.
For years. Reports indicate it was dysfunctional from at least 2008 onwards, leading to massive overflows, especially in winter. Meanwhile, Sulfit, the Palestinian town directly impacted, had been trying for decades to get approval to build its own wastewater treatment plant.
And they couldn't get approval.
They faced constant obstacles from Israeli authorities. At one point, approval for Sulfit's plant was reportedly made conditional on Sulfit, agreeing to also treat the wastewater coming from the Ariel settlement.
So forcing the occupied population to deal with the pollution from the occupier settlement.
That's how the Palestinians saw it, as implicitly legitimizing the settlement by taking responsibility for its waste. And beyond the sewage, there's the industrial waste problem.
Right, from the Barkin industrial zone nearby. What kind of waste are we talking about?
The reports, including from UNICEF, describe the Barkin zone as being notorious for flushing its leftover chemical waste onto Sulfit villages. This isn't just household waste, it's heavy industrial pollutants, petrochemicals, heavy metals, plastics.
And the health impacts?
UN reports and local health officials link these toxic heavy metals directly to severe health problems in the downstream Palestinian communities. Things like kidney failure and higher rates of cancer.
This isn't just abstract data in the reports, is it? There are personal stories.
Yes. One report includes this heartbreaking account from a mother living in the El Matwi Valley, right where the sewage stream flows. She described the smell as deadly. She reported that her 3-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia, and she directly linked the illness to the polluted environment they were forced to endure.
That draws a very direct line from systemic neglect benefiting settlements to severe harm inflicted on Palestinians.
Exactly. That's the connection the reports make. Institutional discrimination leading to inhumane conditions and demonstrable physical harm, fitting the patterns described under apartheid and persecution.
Okay, so we've laid out the long-term systemic picture. Now we need to shift gears into Section 3, the specific allegations of war crimes, focusing on military conduct and excessive force across different periods. Maybe touch briefly on the historical context first. The 1948 war comes up.
Right. The sources do briefly mention historical allegations from 1948, the Nakba. They note that estimates of alleged massacres during that war vary widely. Some sources say 10, others up to 70. Reports cite historians who claim Israeli forces killed hundreds of Arab civilians and prisoners of war in numerous incidents. It sets a historical backdrop.
But the reports focus more intensely on specific documented incidents later on, like during the 1956 Suez Crisis?
Yes. 2 incidents from 1956 are detailed quite extensively as alleged examples of severe breaches. The first is Khan Yunis, November 3, 1956, after Israeli forces captured the town and refugee camp.
What happened then?
Reports compiled by human rights groups and citing UN sources from the time state that IDF troops killed around 275 Palestinians, local residents, and refugees. This reportedly included dozens of summary executions after hostilities had supposedly ended.
So, killings after the fighting was over?
That's the core allegation. Israeli accounts at the time spoke of continued resistance, but Palestinian sources and some UN reports suggested resistance had ceased. The reports cite disturbing specific accounts, like the alleged use of children as human shields to clear houses, and soldiers lining up unarmed men on Jalal Street and firing on them.
And a similar incident happened in Rafah soon after.
Just over a week later, November 12, 1956, in Rafah, around 111 Palestinians were killed there. According to UNRWA officials cited in the reports, Israeli forces ordered all men aged 15 to 60 to gather at a school. When the men hurried to comply, soldiers apparently panicked at the crowd and opened fire.
Firing into a crowd they had ordered to assemble.
That's the account. Survivors also reported beatings, humiliation, being forced to run a gauntlet while being shot at. These 1956 incidents are presented as early, documented examples of alleged mass killings and excessive force against civilian populations during military operations.
Okay, let's move forward in time. How do the sources illustrate patterns of excessive force during periods of popular uprising, like the First Intifada?
The Nahalin raid in April 1989 is often cited as a significant case. Israeli border police raided the village near Bethlehem, ostensibly to arrest youths suspected of stone throwing.
And what happened during the raid?
When youths did throw stones at the forces entering the village, the response was reportedly immediate use of live ammunition. 5 Palestinian youths were killed. Human rights groups at the time, like de-escalation, strongly condemned this, arguing that lethal force against stone throwers was vastly disproportionate and violated basic rules of engagement.
Disproportionate force. And there was another legal issue raised, too.
Yes, collective punishment. After the killings, the entire village was placed under curfew for several days, and other punitive measures were taken. This was widely seen as collective punishment, penalizing the whole community for the actions of a few individuals. Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention explicitly forbids collective penalties, so the incident was flagged for both excessive force and collective punishment, both potential war crimes.
That concern about disproportionate lethal force against demonstrators seems to echo very strongly in the findings about the Great March of Return protests at the Gaza border in 2018-2019.
Absolutely. The UN Commission of Inquiry that investigated those protests came back with very stark findings. They documented that Israeli snipers killed 214 Palestinian demonstrators over that period.
214 killed. What was the key finding regarding the legality of those killings?
The crucial finding was about imminent threat. The commission found that many, if not most, of those killed or seriously injured were shot at considerable distances from the fence, sometimes hundreds of meters away, and posed no imminent threat of death or serious injury to the Israeli soldiers positioned behind defensive fortifications.
So they weren't an immediate danger to the soldiers' lives.
Correct. The commission concluded the force used was neither necessary nor proportional. They found that the snipers were operating under rules of engagement that permitted them to use live ammunition against people simply approaching the fence or damaging it, even if those individuals posed no direct, imminent threat to life. That, the UN body concluded, violates international humanitarian law.
That distinction, imminent threat, seems absolutely central to whether lethal force is lawful in these situations.
It is the defining legal standard. Firing live ammunition at someone who isn't posing an immediate threat to life or serious injury is generally considered unlawful excessive force.
The sources also look at more recent armed clashes, citing specific airstrikes in Gaza in 2019 where civilians were killed.
Yes, both Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International investigated strikes during the flare-ups in May and November 2019. They identified several strikes they deemed apparently unlawful because they killed civilians without an apparent military target, or the likely civilian harm was excessive compared to any anticipated military advantage.
Can you give an example?
A prominent case they highlight is from November 2019. An Israeli airstrike hit the home of the OHCHR family in Deir al-Balah, Gaza. 8 family members were killed while they slept, including 5 children. The reports investigate whether there was a legitimate military objective justifying such a devastating strike on a civilian home, raising serious questions about proportionality and distinction, fundamental principles of the laws of war.
Finally, under the war crimes umbrella, there are findings about targeting civilian infrastructure and using specific restricted weapons or methods.
Right. Looking back at the 2014 Gaza war, for example, multiple human rights groups and UN bodies issued strong warnings about the impact on civilian infrastructure. Reports stated that almost every piece of critical infrastructure, water treatment plants, electricity networks, sewer systems, was severely damaged or destroyed, either by direct hits or collateral damage from the intense bombardment.
And the legal issue here isn't just the damage itself, but Israel's ongoing obligations towards Gaza.
Exactly. Despite the 2005 disengagement, the reports argue that because Israel still exercises significant control over Gaza's borders, airspace, coastal waters, and population registry, it retains specific obligations under international humanitarian law as an occupying power. This includes the obligation to ensure the basic humanitarian needs of the population are met. Widespread destruction of essential infrastructure therefore raises serious questions about fulfilling those obligations.
And regarding specific weapons, white phosphorus comes up.
Yes. The use of white phosphorus munitions by the IDF has been documented and criticized in reports concerning conflicts in both Gaza, like in 2008, 2009, and more recently in southern Lebanon.
Why is white phosphorus so controversial?
While it can have legitimate military uses, like creating smokescreens, it's also an incendiary weapon. It burns fiercely upon contact with oxygen, causing horrific burns down to the bone. Using it in densely populated civilian areas like Gaza City or villages in South Lebanon poses an extremely high risk of severe civilian casualties and suffering. Its use in such areas is heavily restricted, if not prohibited, under international law principles regarding indiscriminate weapons.
The reports also mention concerns about booby-tracked devices, citing the 2024 pager explosions in Lebanon as a potential example. How does international law address those?
Booby traps are largely regulated and often prohibited under amended Protocol 2 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which Israel has ratified. Specifically, Article 7 prohibits using booby traps or similar devices that are disguised as apparently harmless portable objects specifically designed to contain explosives.
Like a pager or potentially headphones, as were also reported.
Exactly. The argument is that everyday objects like pagers, radios, cameras, toys, things civilians, especially children, might naturally pick up or interact with cannot be legally turned into hidden explosive devices. The protocol aims to prevent the deliberate targeting of civilians through such deceptive means. The pager incidents raised immediate concerns under this specific prohibition.
Okay, this incredibly detailed picture of alleged conduct over decades brings us to the final and perhaps most legally complex section. Section 4. The genocide accusation and the current proceedings at the ICJ and ICC.
Right. This is where the legal arguments reach their peak. And it all comes down to proving that incredibly specific mental element, the intent to destroy a group.
Let's just quickly recap the definition of genocide. It's about specific acts, but the intent is the absolute key, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. The Genocide Convention requires proving the specific intent, the dolus specialis, to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such,
meaning targeting them because of their group identity?
Precisely. The underlying acts that can constitute genocide are 1. Killing members of the group, 2. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, 3. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and 4. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. But without proving that specific intent to destroy the group itself, these acts might be war crimes or crimes against humanity, but not genocide.
So how did the sources, especially those supporting South Africa's case at the ICJ, try to establish this genocidal intent regarding the recent conflict in Gaza? What's the evidence presented?
The argument relies heavily on a combination of the scale of destruction and killing, the conditions created, and crucially, statements made by high-level Israeli officials. The single most cited piece of evidence for intent is Prime Minister Netanyahu's televised address to troops in late October 2023, where he invoked the biblical story of Amalek.
The Amalek reference? Why is that considered so significant legally?
In the Hebrew Bible, the command regarding Amalek is interpreted by many scholars, and seemingly by Netanyahu in context, as a call for total extermination, killing men, women, children, even livestock. When Netanyahu told soldiers, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you," and we do remember, and framed the war as one between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, lawyers arguing the genocide case present this as explicit, high-level evidence of dehumanization and an intention to destroy, not just defeat, the enemy group associated with Hamas.
So the argument connects these high-level statements establishing the alleged intent
To the actions on the ground, particularly the third act of genocide. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction.
And how is that argued?
The most prominent argument centers on the alleged use of starvation as a weapon of war. In February 2024, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Michael Fakhri, formally accused Israel of intentionally depriving Palestinians in Gaza of food, stating this could amount to genocide. He emphasized that intentionally starving a civilian population is, at minimum, a war crime.
And the sources suggest this wasn't just a consequence of war, but potentially a continuation of earlier policy.
That's a crucial part of the argument about systemic intent. Reports recall findings from 2012 about Israeli policy documents from 2008. These documents apparently detailed calculations made by Israeli officials to determine the minimum number of calories needed per person in Gaza.
Minimum calories. For what purpose?
The stated goal, according to a Haaretz report cited in these sources, was to keep Gaza's economy on the brink of collapse, but to avoid a full-blown humanitarian crisis that would attract major international condemnation. This suggests, the reports argue, a pre-existing, calculated policy of restricting life-sustaining goods, not just for security, but for broader political or economic pressure.
And how did the recent conflict dramatically worsen these conditions, according to the reports?
The reports detail the systematic destruction of Gaza's food production capacity. Farms, greenhouses, bakeries, food factories were bombed. Water desalination plants and pipelines were destroyed. Critically, there were numerous consistent reports about Israeli forces severely restricting the entry of humanitarian aid trucks and long delays at checkpoint.
And even attacks on aid distribution itself.
Yes, there were deeply alarming reports, including investigations by major news outlets and human rights groups, documenting incidents where Israeli snipers allegedly targeted Palestinians waiting for aid trucks, or where aid convoys themselves were hit. This active interference with the delivery of essential survival items is presented as strong evidence of deliberately creating conditions leading to starvation and disease.
The sources also connect these devastating conditions to the fourth potential act of genocide, imposing measures intended to prevent births. How?
The UN Commission of Inquiry and reports from doctors on the ground paint a harrowing picture of the impact on reproductive health. Pregnant women lack basic prenatal care, nutrition, and safe places to deliver. Many are forced into unsafe deliveries in overcrowded shelters without medical assistance.
And the impact on mothers and newborns.
Obstetricians reported skyrocketing rates of complications. Severe malnutrition affecting mothers' ability to carry to term or breastfeed, increased miscarriages, stillbirths, and life-threatening conditions for newborns due to starvation, dehydration, and disease. The argument is that creating conditions where safe childbirth becomes almost impossible effectively constitutes imposing measures intended to prevent births within the targeted group.
This massive body of allegations and evidence led directly to formal international legal action. First, at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ.
Right. South Africa brought the case against Israel to the ICJ, invoking the Genocide Convention. They argued that Israel's actions, particularly in Gaza following October 7th, showed patterns consistent with genocidal intent and constituted breaches of the convention. They explicitly drew parallels to South Africa's own history, arguing the conduct bore a strong resemblance to apartheid.
And the ICJ issued a preliminary ruling in January 2024 on the plausibility of genocide. What did that mean? Legally, it wasn't a final judgment, right?
No, absolutely not a final judgment on whether genocide has occurred. That could take years. The plausibility ruling was about provisional measures. The court found that at least some of the acts alleged by South Africa fell within the scope of the Genocide Convention, and that the rights of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from genocide were at real and imminent risk. Therefore, the claim was plausible enough to warrant ordering immediate protective measures.
Plausible was the threshold. And what did that trigger?
It triggered a legally binding obligation on Israel under the ICJ statute to comply with the court's orders. It also, importantly, triggered the obligation under the Genocide Convention for all state parties, essentially the entire world, to use their influence to prevent genocide now that a plausible risk had been identified by the court.
And what specific measures did the ICJ order Israel to take?
The key provisional measures ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of acts defined in the Genocide Convention, ensure its military does not commit any such acts, prevent and punish direct and public incitement to commit genocide, enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to Gaza, and preserve evidence related to the allegations.
So, a set of urgent, legally binding instructions under international scrutiny.
Unprecedented scrutiny, yes.
And then came the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which is different from the ICJ, right? It deals with individuals, not states.
Correct. The ICC investigates and prosecutes individuals for the most serious international crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression.
And in November 2024, the ICC prosecutor requested, and the judges approved, arrest warrants. For whom and for what?
Arrest warrants were issued for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The court found there were reasonable grounds to believe they bear individual criminal responsibility for alleged crimes committed in the context of the Gaza conflict, from at least October 8, 2023 until at least May 20, 2024.
And the specific charges in those warrants?
They include both war crimes and crimes against humanity. Specifically, the war crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, and crimes against humanity including murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts.
Persecution, again, linking back to that systematic element.
Exactly. Crimes against humanity, by definition, require proof that the acts were part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against a civilian population, pursuant to a state or organizational policy. So the ICC charges connect the alleged specific actions during the war back to a broader pattern of potential state-sanctioned policy targeting civilians.
Now, throughout all of this, the NGO reports, the ICJ case, the ICC warrants, Israel has maintained a consistent defense. As we kind of bring this complex legal overview to a close, what's the core of their position?
Israel's consistent position, presented to these bodies and publicly, rests on several key arguments. First, that its military operations, particularly after October 7th, constitute legitimate self-defense against attack by Hamas and other groups designated as terrorist organizations.
Self-defense, okay.
Second, they argue the IDF operates according to international law and takes significant measures to minimize civilian harm, issuing warnings, creating evacuation routes, acting as morally as possible under difficult circumstances. Third, and critically, in response to the high casualty figures and destruction, they assert that Hamas and other militant groups bear primary responsibility because they deliberately embed military assets within civilian areas, use civilians as human shields, and launch attacks from civilian infrastructure, thereby making those areas legitimate military targets.
And regarding the specific charge of genocide,
They vehemently reject the accusation of genocidal intent. They emphasize that their fight is with Hamas, not the Palestinian people, and point to official directives from the War Cabinet that they argue show no policy aimed at destroying the Palestinian population. They attribute any problematic statements by lower-level figures or politicians as not reflective of official policy.
okay. So after this incredibly detailed deep dive, we're left with these two major parallel threads running through all this source material.
Yeah.
Decades of analysis.
Yeah, that seems right. The first thread is about that long-term institutionalized regime, the charges of apartheid and persecution, focusing on control over land, residency, resources, demographics. It's about the system of alleged domination.
And the second thread.
The second zooms in on specific military conduct, especially in recent conflicts. The allegations of war crimes, excessive force, targeting civilians or infrastructure, unlawful weapons, and then the ultimate charge of genocide, focusing on actions and, crucially, intent during intense hostilities.
It's interesting. The reports mention how the fragmentation of the Palestinian population, Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, Israel proper, serves as a technique of control, making the overall system harder to see. It feels like the legal analysis itself can sometimes feel fragmented too, dealing with different bodies of law, different time periods.
That's a really insightful point. The sources themselves, in a way, argue against that fragmentation.
Yeah.
They suggest that by meticulously documenting the specific policies in Jerusalem, the resource denial in the West Bank, the closure of Gaza, the conduct during wars, you have to put it all together. You have to use the rigorous, specific language of international law, apartheid, persecution, war crimes, genocide, to actually see the alleged comprehensive systemic reality that connects all these pieces across time and territory. These reports force that difficult, holistic view.
Right. So the material really lays out this incredibly complex web of alleged violations and potential legal accountability, stretching back decades. It makes you think, if the phrase never again, which sort of founded the whole post-World War II international legal order, is the guiding principle, what do these multiple serious legal investigations from credible bodies tell us about who that phrase is truly meant to protect today? And maybe what are the implications for global justice if these findings are substantiated?
That's the profound question these documents leave us with.